The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome to the Centre Standardisation training for Level 3 Health and Social Care with technical qualifications. This webinar is part of the additional support that we're offering centres in their delivery of the technical qualifications. It's going to be recorded, so it will be available afterwards as well, and there'll be an opportunity for you to ask some questions. So you'll find that you've been muted, but you will have the opportunity to ask questions. So you can make a note of those either throughout, or there is an opportunity when you can type them in, which we will either respond to today, or we will follow up with a written response after the webinar is finished. So just a little bit of background on standardisation, really. The meeting is focusing on helping centres to plan for their internal standardisation for their markers. Obviously, when you have multiple markers or more than one marker on a qualification marking assessment, you need to ensure that they have a common understanding of the marking standard, and that everyone is marking to that standard, so that you can be sure that even though there are a number of markers, they're going to be coming to the same assessment decisions. And the reason this is important, obviously, is when the moderation process takes place. If there's consistent marking decisions, it makes it much easier for us to ascertain whether the marking is accurate. So it should be the case that if you standardise properly your markers, then they're all coming to the same decision, and it means that accuracy is more likely, and adjustments will not need to be made when it comes to the moderation process, hopefully. So to help with that, you need to organise standardisation sessions to ensure that markers share a common understanding. So today's webinar really is a kind of some support to help you with that. The way that this is going to run, I should say, my name is Dan White. I work for the Quality Assurance team at Sitting Guilds, and I am facilitating the meeting, so handling the kind of admin side of things. And I'm here with Sue Harwood, who is the Principal Moderator for Health and Social Care.
Hello, my name is Sue Harwood.
She will be handling the actual subject-specific information about standardisation. So she will handle the majority of the talking. What's going to happen with this meeting is we're going to go through the slides. We're going to look at you should have been sent some pre-reading of the last year's synoptic and some guidance on the marking, which you will have read. We're going to have a brief look at the task that was looked at, a discussion of assessment objectives, a look at the marking grid and some of the forms that you'll be using, and Sue will sort of talk through that. And then, as I say, there's an opportunity to ask some questions at the end, and a bit more information about further support. So without, as I just say, if you do have questions, feel free to type them in as you talk, as we're talking. We'll see them in the bottom box on the right hand corner of the screen, or there is going to be a section when you can actually take some time and write some questions in if you just want to concentrate on what's being said. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Sue.
So hello there, everybody. I wanted to go through the objectives of the session first of all. So what we're doing today is looking at the material that you've been looking at in standardisation, and we're going to explain the justification of marks for last year's synoptic assignment. It is different this year, but the principles and the process remain the same. So we're going to be looking at the moderation process, highlighting some good practice and the importance of the use of the Sitting Guilds documents. And then, as Dan said, looking at the different ways you can use standardisation activities to standardise your moderation, and then give you an opportunity for questions, which we'll either answer today or get back to you very promptly by email. So I hope that's all right for you. Just to move on, that's all right. So you were all given copies of some exemplar material last year, and just to review what the candidate, some of the forms, the Declaration of Authenticity which is a really important document for all learners to have against their synoptic assessment, signed by the learner, signed by the tutor, stating whether the learner's received any additional support, but also authenticating that it is their work. So all learners need to have that completed, please. And for the sample that we select for external moderation, these forms would need to be produced. So that's an important document for us. Thank you. We'll now go to the tasks. So last year, the learners at level 3 were asked to complete 3, but for the whole of the synoptic assessment, they were asked to produce, to complete 3 case studies and a professional discussion. That has actually changed this year, but as I said, the principles remain the same. So they were all given, prior to the assessment activity, task briefs for 3 case studies. The first case study was about Radha, who was, and the focus of this case study was health and safety. The second case study was about Valerie, and the focus for this case study was person-centered care. And the third case study was about George, and the focus of that case study was safeguarding. So the learners all had the scenario. They could go away and research and resource their information on these assignments, ready to come back into a supervised condition, assessment condition, where they actually completed tasks on the assignments. And for each case study, they generally produced evidence for 2 to 3 tasks, and they were clearly informed what they needed to complete, whether it was a written report or a plan of care or whatever. So for assignment 1, they had to complete 1 written account and 1 report. For assignment 2, they had to complete a diagram, a plan of care, and a written account. And for assignment 3, they had to complete 3 written accounts. So we won't go through those case studies in detail, because you will all have had them and gone through them for your standardisation activity. The fourth part of their assignment was to complete a professional discussion, and what we have here is the information that the learner would need to be given prior to the professional discussion, so they knew exactly what topics were going to be brought out, but also how they should plan for it. And this is something that came up last year, how important it was that the learners had this planning and were told that they needed to bring their reflective practice workbook in, and also reminded not to divulge any confidential information. So that was quite an important thing arising last year, that they needed really good preparation. I will also say, in terms of the, and I'll say it probably several times in this presentation, that it really benefited the learners if we had recorded professional discussions, because, as you'll see later on, the listening to the learner's voice and actually enabling us to actually hear their responses gave us much more information about what they knew and understood about their effective practice and their practice in the care setting. So, just to move on again, we wanted to go through now how we banded and marked against each of the assessment objectives. Last year there were more assessment objectives. These have now been reduced, and therefore what we actually did for this, carrying out this standardisation activity, we remarked the work, the sample work, so that you could actually see how each assessment objective was marked. So in the first instance, we were looking at recall of knowledge. It gave 20% of the, it carried 20% weighting, and it's just important to just note what kind of weighting each of the AOs has in the assessment. So for assessment objective 1, we felt that the learner had given excellent recall of knowledge across the assignments and the professional discussion, which showed depth and breadth. They'd actually talked about key legislation, relevant policies relevant to care practice, and they considered those within the task and made relevant referencing to theoretical principles where required. That we did identify in case study 3, they could have produced more evidence of this in relation to the range of care services and professionals and risk assessment. But overall, we felt that there was a very competent evidence of recall and considerable depth and breadth. So therefore, we awarded 9 marks. If you go back into the rest of the relevant assessment objective, you can actually see how that was given. So we felt they showed in-depth and detailed knowledge across the whole qualification range, a lot of accuracy and confidence, and explanations clear and strong. But we gave them a 9 because we did feel that in case study 3 there could have been some slight extension of their recall. In AO2, which is about understanding, bringing it all together, applying theories and knowledge to a particular situation, we gave this learner 13. And you can see, if we go to how those marks were awarded. Hang on 1 minute. I think it's the next one. Actually, it says 14 here, but either way, we felt they showed considerable depth and sound understanding with links to current legislation, core care behaviours, and person-centred approaches in working practice. Lots of application of knowledge, especially in case study 2 with the care planning. And overall, there were minimal misunderstandings and a good exploration of concepts and care values, principles of person-centred care, health and safety, and safeguarding. Now, this is a good point here to bring in the professional discussion, because it was by actually listening to the discussion that we could see that there was very effective reflection on their own learning from practice. And this is where they brought out their understanding of the core care behaviours and person-centred approaches and care values. And it was very easy to see how that they were referring back to some examples within their care practice, which really came out in the recorded professional discussion.
I'm just going to, well, I can see one of our delegates has their hand raised, which I'm just wondering if there's an issue. So Anna, I'm just going to unmute you. So if you can, hi Anna, is there an issue, or do you have a question? Okay, the mic's muted again. If you have a question, you can type it into the right-hand corner. If it's about audio issues or anything like that, just type it into the question box on the right-hand corner, and we can address it there. It might be that you accidentally hit the button that says you've raised your hand. So I'm just going to continue. If you do have an issue, please just type it in that box, and we'll pick it up. Okay, sorry, back to you, Sue.
Okay, if we look at AO3 now. So this is application of practical and technical skills. In this synoptic assessment, learners are not assessed in their working practice with practical skills. So this assessment objective is assessed in relation to their ability to reflect, to report writing, and to actually present their evidence. So it is actually assessed in that way. So again, with this learner, we felt we could go to the actual mark they've been assessed on. Here we are, we gave them a 9, very few grammatical spelling or spelling errors or grammatical errors. And then we've got competent written assignment writing skills, and again, solid use of reflection within the professional discussion and reference back to reflective practice workbook. Just to mention here about the reflective practice workbook, it really was very evident last year that those learners who'd used that workbook well and had got a really solid piece of evidence in front of them could make good use of it in the professional discussion. And where that hadn't happened, the responses that came out were far weaker and didn't do the candidate much justice, quite honestly. So a real plug for that reflective practice workbook, please. The next assessment objective, bringing it all together, coherence across the whole subject. Again, we're looking at applying knowledge and understanding to particular situations and justifying decisions and approaches taken. And this is where reflection and evaluation in the professional discussion and case studies really came out. And for this learner, for this particular assignment, we gave them, we moved their particular report, we gave them a 9, and we really felt that in case study 1 and 3 they'd shown very good links between theory and practice. And then again in the professional discussion, use of reflective accounts completed in the workbook showed how they could actually use their knowledge and applied skills in the practical area. We even had in the reflective account workbook little testimonies from the workplace, which again added to the learners' evidence to show that they actually could complete this assessment objective. And the final one is assessment to detail, where we're looking at meeting specific requirements of the task, all the case studies, the professional discussion plans. Sometimes this would also link into the way that the learner could actually express themselves in their writing and in their speaking. So that was quite good to see in the professional discussion. And for this learner, we gave them a 5. They met all the requirements, good attention to detail, and actually had considered how that they could apply legislation theory in the case study. So that's how we actually use the marking grid, and you've all seen that the total mark for this learner was 46, which would put them into the high banding area, which would eventually lead them into being graded distinction learner. You've all seen the learner's evidence, and I would say that it is really important for the learners to be taught and guided in how to cite and reference their links to resources or any research they've looked at or any kind of resources from their work area. But I'd like to move on now to, you can just see that online. So some people are given ways to reference their work, but it needs to be clear how they've got where they've got their resources from. If we could just move to the professional discussion record, which is the 4th part of their synoptic assessment. And it's key to remember that when you're looking at the assessment, you're not looking at 4 different assessments, you're looking at 4 different big tasks within one synoptic assessment. So I wanted to show you how the records were produced for this learner following the professional discussion. Now we did have this learner's recording, which unfortunately we couldn't let you have for various reasons, but we have got the notes. And what this is showing you is this is actually a good recording of written notes against the professional discussion. We did have quite a lot last year, which were handwritten, difficult to read, some of which were very much in bullet point form, so really didn't give us the detail that we needed. And especially if there was no recording, we were really not able to make good judgments on whether or not the evidence supporting the marks that have been given. So another plug for recording the professional discussions, please. And regardless of whether they are or aren't, there must be really detailed notes. If there is no recording done, then really it should be verbatim what the learner has said, because otherwise we cannot moderate this properly. So please plug for that. And you'll see at the bottom of the page, this person's put 2 prompts given. So we do need to know whether the learner was prompted or not. It doesn't always then impact on the marks, but it can do. So you'll see this is how the recording, the votes were made. Obviously, if there's a recording, this person should have put the timing in as well so that we could find that, but they didn't. So it's really key. Also on page 19, you'll see that in the first section, we'll get to that in a minute. Here we are, in here. You can see with fifth line down, reference has been made to page 26 of the workbook. So people uploaded the workbooks and would actually guide us to where it had shown in the workbook that the learner had talked about, in this instance, the 6 C's. So it's important that it is linked to their work practice, and I can't say enough how that did impact on marks for many of the learners, that the professional discussion was conducted well and in detail, and they had completed those reflections.
Yeah, and I'd echo what Sue's saying, that one of the common issues we had across a number of qualifications is where there was a disparity between what was said and what was seen. And so the more evidence that we can have to back up the kind of marks given by the centre, the less likely there is going to be any kind of issues when it comes to the moderation process. So it's really, really good to just get as thorough, detailed evidence as possible, especially, as we say, with something ephemeral like a discussion.
Okay, thank you. Now if we move on to the candidate record form. Now, one thing I'll say is I'll go back to the point that some centres last year completed one of these for each case study and the professional discussion. So each learner ended up with 4 candidate record forms or the equivalent. And this is not needed. What is needed is 1 candidate record form across the synoptic. So the assessment of objectives, the mark given is across the tasks compiling the synoptic assessment. That's really important. The second thing here I would say is that please let us know in this if there are any tasks that a learner has not completed. So last year we had a couple of people who hadn't completed one of the case studies or one of the tasks in one of the case studies, and there was no evidence or information telling us that. So therefore we were having to go back to centre saying, is this an error? Because we didn't want to disadvantage the learner. So if they haven't completed some of the case studies, please let us know. I would also let us know if, for example, they didn't complete the reflective practice workbook, etc., because that will help us to understand why the marks are what they are, and also if they have had any special support or assistance. So looking at this document, you're using the marking grid we looked at to allocate marks and then provide a rationale as to why those marks have been allocated in the way they have. So basically you're justifying the mark you're giving them. And you can see AO1 is about recall of knowledge. Now this is our marking. You may put much more detail in about where certain tasks have met the recall. So you may tell us more, give us more examples of where, for example, in AO1 it has been evidenced, whereas we're doing a much sort of more generic report here. AO2 understanding, there's still example given the case study 2 care plan, and we're looking here, about depth and breadth and understanding of the knowledge that's been detailed, and there were very few misunderstandings. Practical skills, we're looking at the assignment writing skills, and then also about the effective communication of information, ideas, and the professional discussion. Bringing it all together, how the learner's done that across the case studies and the professional discussion, and the justification and linkage of all that knowledge and understanding, and how that's come out in the completion of the workbook and the professional discussion. And then attending to detail how the tasks have actually met the requirements, a few grammatical and spelling errors, and the detail given the consideration of application of legislation theory for case studies. And then that brings out a final mark, which, when it's put together with all the other marks, creates a grading profile, and this learner can actually is enabled to actually get a grade. So that's how we wanted you to show you how we're expecting these to be produced, so that we can really externally moderate your learners effectively and make holistic judgments, really.
and another thing I'd add as well is it really helps to focus when you're using the candidate record form. I think it's fair to say it's good to focus back to the marking grids, as Sue said, and the language that's used in those marking grids. We'd expect to see a reflection to justify the marks awarded. So if someone is in a specific band, then the kind of language being used to describe their performance should relate to those adjectives and verbs. And just generally the language being reflected, I think that really helps.
Yes.
Because this should be a reflection of the performance that you saw, and anything that contradicts it makes it harder for the moderators to understand how the marks are awarded. So we're returning to the. Okay. So I think now is the time that if you have any questions about what's been said or just about standardisation in general that you think you'd like answered, we're going to give you a couple of minutes to ask those questions. If you could type them in, as Anna's done with in that corner there, and we will either try and answer them now if we can, or we will take them away and provide a written response. We're going to provide a written response for all the questions we've received at the 2 webinars we've run for this qualification today, and that will be sent to all delegates along with the recording. But I'm just going to mute us for a second, so if you want to take that time to just a couple of minutes, if you've got any questions, type them in now. Obviously, if you haven't, then so be it. Okay, we've got a question from Jill. I'm just wondering if centres are given a moderator to help before marking begins. No, it's not the case with these qualifications. The moderator is very much someone who comes in after the fact and is essentially checking the consistency and accuracy of centre marking. But we do have support. There is a marking and moderation guide which hopefully you've seen and familiarised yourself with, but we can show you where that is. And then there's also, we do have a technical to moderation support team. So if there are sort of general queries you have that can't be answered by the guidance document, then that's kind of where you would get that. And they will be able to help you. And obviously we're trying to do things like these webinars and additional support to kind of help people with to give sort of additional support to centres. But no, you don't actually have a moderator to help to come in and give you guidance with the process. But I would just say, please just use our resources and our customer support services because we will try and get you prompt and accurate responses. We have another question from Anna. We're just gonna take a moment to read that.
The question here is about the referencing in the case study assessments and whether that could be pre-prepared. The key thing is that the learners are given the scenario before the assessment window, and the expectation is that they're given sufficient time to go away and look at that assessment scenario and think to themselves, well, this is obviously about health and safety, or this is obviously about patient-centred care, and gather their information in order that when they come in, they can actually answer questions on it. So if they've gathered their information, they will actually have some notes as to where they've got their information from when they come into the assessment, and they can write that in. So they wouldn't have the same quotes because they're doing their own independent information gathering, and also it's nothing to do with divulging the nature of the questions, because they should be looking at the scenario and saying to themselves, what's this about? What am I likely to be asked about? Look at what this is saying. So it's really key that they read that scenario and think to themselves, okay, what's this really about? And that will direct their evidence gathering, and also they then can bring in their information where they've taken their sources from.
Okay, I will just give us another minute or so. Any other questions or a follow-up question? So if you have another one, please do feel free to type it in. I'm just going to pause us, mute us again for a second. Okay. So if you do have any other questions, obviously, oh, here we go. There we go. Anna's got a follow-up. Just give us 1 second to have a look at this, Anna.
Yes. Okay, the question is, does this mean that as a teacher we're limited as to how much guidance is given once they have been given the case studies? Yes, that is correct. The learner's given the case study scenario, not the questions, and with that they should have, in the preparation that you will have undertaken during the year to prepare them for this, they should know that, right, okay, this is what I've got to do. I'm going to read this case study, and this is the sort of information I'm going to have to go and gather. So yes, you shouldn't really be guiding them.
Okay, so
or whatever time it is that you've got in preparation for the assignments. That's part of this is helping them to understand that if they're given a scenario, they know what to look for in that scenario, and they can go and research it.
And obviously the assessment window is sort of open
yes.
now until I think some final submission of marks is May the, I think it's the 18th
yes.
this year. So obviously that's the assessment window.
Yes.
So when you undertake this is obviously up to you to plan it within that. But that's the kind of limitation I would say that it has to be submitted by that point. Just while we wait, I'm going to just move this slide on, just to say that we do have some generic kind of guidance or suggestions about good practice for internal standardisation for centres. These bullet points here. We will be sharing these slides with everyone who attends as well. So, but there's some good sort of tips for internal standardisation. And as I say, the marking and moderation guide that we produced really has a lot of information available to centres about the process of marking the assessments, submitting the actual kind of administrative side of it is submitting it, but also there's stuff about standardisation in there, there's stuff about the moderation process and what happens and the kind of decisions that get made. So I would really recommend that you familiarise yourself with that guidance document. On the next slide we'll show a link to that. Okay, just got another question from Anna, sorry. Just going to mute us for a sec while we read your question, Anna. Hi, Anna. Yeah, I think the answer to that, I think really with these tasks is there are a number of tasks. They're given 3 hours per task, so the expectation is that they could be administered across a number of days if need be. It isn't quite as controlled as an exam, obviously, so it is up to you how you deliver those assessments, as long as the sort of the security of them is maintained and that you don't, you follow the guidance in terms of how they're administered. But yeah, in terms of they don't have to be done on the same day, and in fact you could do different cohorts on a different day of the same task if you could make that work. But the real thing is that obviously those candidates need to not speak to each other, and they don't. No one is unfairly advantaged, I think, is the fair response. But we will go away and get you a sort of a more sort of coherent written response to that and all these questions. So, and that'll get sent out after this. Okay. Okay. Yeah, we'll get a written response, as I say. No worries. Does that mean they could be just? As far as we're aware, the thing is that the administration of the tasks can be, you don't have to do all the tasks in one day.
You need, as far as we obviously will get this clarified, but as far as my understanding is that someone would come in and do a case study, a 3-hour case study, and complete all the tasks within that case study at one go. But then they would do the next case study in another assessment period that's agreed by you. But in terms of, if you're talking about, they wouldn't come in and just do question 1 and then come in from case study A and then question 2 the next day. That certainly didn't happen last year. People came in and wrote up all the tasks for the first case study in one sitting. I think if you had a situation where that was necessary for a particular learner, it would have to be agreed with moderation support. But we will get back to you on that.
Yeah, we'll provide some. I think it's probably easiest to just to refer directly back to the task and get a written response to you on this, just so that we don't end up tying ourselves up in knots over this. So if that's okay, what we'll do is we'll get a kind of definitive answer about administration of tasks and get that out to you. So we've just got another question from Jill.
I'm not. Jill's asked for further standardisation, further sample work to use a standardisation exercise across the department. I think if you want to do that, you could certainly write into moderation support. They may, say that's fine. But I think that the case studies this year are quite different. So I'm not quite sure how useful that would be. It's more really this exercise was just to enable you to actually look at the process quite clearly. So I'm not sure whether or not that would be useful, but if you want to do that, just write into moderation support, and I can't say that they will or won't.
Well, we'll get a response about whether there is actually any exemplar material, and we take it on board as well, the request. So I think again we just need to go away and get you a formal response on whether anything is available, because I know that there may be discussion of producing exemplar materials to help standardisation. But again, if you can bear with us, the written responses we get will go out ideally sort of a few days after this meeting, so we'll get those to you next week, and that should help. If you can bear with us on that, that'd be great. I think if there are any further questions, what I'll do is this is the additional support and resources we have. Our technical pages have a lot of information. I'm sure you are aware of these pages, but on our website, the technical qualification pages, we have a lot of information available to centres, guidance and support. In particular, I think the resources and support tab, which I've just clicked on, there's a lot of information in there. And again, we'll have recordings of webinars. There's generic webinar information that things we've recorded, but there's also all the guidance documents and support materials are here, including what I spoke of, the marking moderation guide. Again, if you have seen that already, then I would hope you're kind of familiarising yourself with it. But if not, then it's really, really, really key to the marking of the synoptic assessment. It does have some good standardisation information in there, albeit generic, not subject specific. So that's one thing that the resources and support section of the website is really useful. The other thing that Sue's already mentioned is we have the moderation support, technicals and moderation support team, who are available to answer lots of questions about actually delivering and assessing the synoptic assessments and related sort of centre assessed components. And that's their email address. I've just seen that we've got another question from Anna. I think after this we will have to draw a line on the questions just for time, and you can submit any follow-up questions to this address, the moderation support. We'll send that out. So if you just give us 1 second, we're going to have a quick read of this question. Hi Anna, we can't really talk about feedback from students and the kind of workload in this. I'm afraid I wouldn't feel comfortable talking about that sort of thing. Again, we'll take it away and we can sort of follow up on any questions, but it's not. I'm afraid that's just something I'm not really comfortable talking about in this sort of generic standardisation guidance. I apologise. I don't like to not be able to answer the question. But yeah, I think we're going to have to not answer that one in this session, certainly. Okay, so the other thing we should mention actually is that there is a qualification report available. This is an overview of basically how the qualification performed overall. And it's something that we would urge all centres to read, especially because it deals with a kind of holistic view of the qualification performance.
So the actual report is divided into 2 sections. There's a section which gives the initial section, which actually looks at the grade distinctions across the whole qualification. But then you actually have a report from the chief examiner about the exam, because as you know, the learners sit an exam as well. And then there's the report on the synoptic assignment and the grade boundaries against the assessment objectives. And really the main comments, which is what I've talked about in the presentation today, about the fact that the professional discussion really benefited from being from us having the tape, and also the taping of it, and also that how the learners benefit, basically how the learners performed with the case studies, which by and large were actually extremely effective and really showed good evidence from. So the actual synoptic assignment at the time was really well received. Anyway, it's worth reading it through yourselves. Just as reminders.
They're available on the qualification page of the website, and we will probably send this out as well with any responses we have. The follow-up information that's sent out after this session. But yeah, it's definitely worth reading that if you haven't already, because it does give a kind of idea about which assessment objectives centres struggled with or achieved, and just gives you a kind of wider picture of general performance. So that kind of brings us to the end of the session. Thank you very much for your engagement with it. Lots of good questions. Apologies for the ones that we couldn't answer or didn't give a satisfactory answer. We will make sure that everything that comes out written, the written responses are finite and definitive, and that will come out a few days after this meeting once we've collated them all, because we've had a session this morning. We want to include those questions as well. I'd like to thank Sue for leading the session. I hope you found it useful, and as I say, it's been recorded, so the recording will be available to you. And again, if you have any follow-up questions about this or any other aspect of technicals, then we would urge you to get in contact in the first instance with the technicals and moderation support team, who will either be able to respond to you directly or get a kind of escalate to get a response from the relevant department. So we would urge you to use those resources, and obviously hit the website up and make sure you familiarise yourself with the guidance documents. And thank you very much for your time today.